What do you do when your own daughter quietly drops a strange powder into your soup and assumes you are too harmless to notice? What happens when you switch the plates, call the ambulance, and then watch her and her new family try to blame you for everything? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Gord Reed, and people like to call me Calm. Sometimes they say it as a good thing, sometimes as a joke. I do not raise my voice, I listen, I take notes. That night, in my small kitchen, I found out what it really means to stay calm when the people you love think you are nothing. My house is old and quiet. The paint in the hallway is a little faded. The kitchen has clean tiles, a table for 4, and a glass cabinet that still holds the same plates from when Chloe was little. I keep everything neat because these days, neatness is something I can control. Chloe is my only child. She is 24 now. She studies marketing and lives closer to the city, near her mother and her mother's new husband. We used to see each other every week, then every month. Now, a visit is something I have to arrange like a formal meeting. When she sent a short text saying she could come for dinner and that Laura and Victor would bring her, I read that message 5 times. It was only one line, but it meant they would all step into my world again. I took the day off work. I am a senior accountant, which means long hours with numbers and rules. I told my boss I needed personal time. He did not ask many questions. At my age, people assume you have private problems and they try not to get involved. I started cooking in the afternoon. Chloe always liked my simple vegetable soup when she was a child, so I made that. I cut the carrots in thin rounds, the way she used to request. I added potatoes, celery, some herbs. The smell filled the whole house. I kept thinking that when she walked in, she would smile and say it reminded her of home. That thought kept me moving as I wiped the counters, straightened the chairs, and checked the oven even though nothing was baking. I set the table with my best plates and real glasses, not the old mugs I use when I am alone. I placed a small vase with 3 flowers from the supermarket in the center. It looked simple, but I was proud of it. I wanted things to feel warm, even if their lives now are full of big houses and fancy restaurants. They arrived right on time. I saw the bright headlights sweep across my living room wall before the knock came. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was Victor's suit and watch, shining even in my small entryway light. He stepped inside like a guest at a motel, looking around with a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. Laura followed, elegant as always, with a careful expression on her face like she did not want to touch anything by accident. Chloe came last. Her hair was styled in a way I had not seen before, and her bag looked like something from a brand advertisement. She gave me a quick hug that felt more like a tap, told me she was busy and tired, and moved past me to look at her phone again. Victor commented on how far my house was from the main road. He made a small remark that the drive felt endless and that the neighborhood was very quiet, in a tone that turned the word quiet into a gentle insult. Laura said the place had not changed at all and looked around as if she expected the walls to be closer together. Chloe told me she had trouble finding parking and said it was strange not to have an underground garage. I guided them to the kitchen, trying to ignore the sting in each remark. The soup was ready on the stove, the table set. I told them to sit, and I carried the pot over. Victor glanced at the chairs and made a joke about how they were the same ones from the old house. Laura laughed softly. Chloe rolled her eyes and said she remembered hitting her knee on one of them when she was 10. I served the soup, one bowl at a time. Chloe sat across from me with Laura on one side and Victor on the other. I placed the last bowl in front of myself and sat down, but Chloe stopped me with a small wave of her hand. She said she wanted to talk about something important before we ate. Her voice was light, but the topic was not. She started to explain that she had found a car she liked. She said she needed someone to co-sign the loan because the interest would be better. She looked at me when she said it, but her tone made it sound like she was placing an order, not asking for help. Victor added that they had already spoken to a dealer he knew, and that there were better options if my credit was not strong enough. He smiled when he said it, the kind of smile that hides a test. I listened while they described the car, the color, the interior, the monthly payments. When I asked a few careful questions about her budget, Chloe became impatient. She said Victor understood modern finance better and that I always worried too much. Laura sat there, calm, watching the soup steam between us. I stood up to get some bread from the counter. It was a simple loaf from the bakery, sliced and ready. I turned my back for a moment, took a breath, and told myself not to feel small. I told myself this was just how things were now. As I picked up the breadboard, something moved in the corner of my eye. The glass door of the cabinet beside the table gave a faint reflection of the room. In that thin, warped image, I saw Chloe lean toward my bowl. Her hand moved fast. A small packet appeared from her pocket, and she emptied a fine powder into the soup that was meant for me. She glanced at Victor, and his eyes flicked down to the bowl, then back up as if nothing had happened. My body went still. My heart did not race, but it felt heavy. For a second, the scene looked unreal, like something from a late-night show, not my own kitchen. I turned slowly, still holding the bread. They were all sitting like nothing was wrong. Chloe's lips were pressed together in a thin line that could have been a smile. I walked back to the table, set the bread down, and said nothing. I took my seat. Chloe picked up her spoon and stirred her soup. I could see tiny white grains swirling near the top. I looked at Laura and Victor. They were busy with their napkins and glasses. I told myself to breathe. My fingers did not shake. Then I did something very simple. I said I had forgotten the salt. I lifted my bowl as if I was going to stand up again. Instead, I set it down in front of Chloe. I picked up her untouched bowl and placed it quietly at my own place. No one said a word. Chloe still held her spoon in her hand. Her eyes were on her phone for a second. When she looked up again, the bowls had swapped places. She did not notice or pretended not to. She started to eat, making a small comment about how I still cooked old-style food with no exact measurements, just a feeling. Victor laughed and said it was charming in its way. Laura asked me if I had ever thought about selling the house and moving to an apartment closer to the city. I answered politely. All the while, I watched Chloe. At first, she was fine. She took several spoonfuls, then a sip of water, then another spoonful. After a few minutes, her face lost some color. She pressed her hand to her forehead and blinked slowly. She said she felt strange, that the room was moving a little. Her voice was thin now. She reached for the table edge. Laura jumped up. Victor pushed his chair back. They both turned on me in the same motion. Laura asked if the soup was fresh. Victor demanded to know what I had put in it. He used words like careless and irresponsible. He suggested that maybe I had stored something wrong in the fridge. The word blame was not spoken, but it sat between us like a fourth plate. I said we needed an ambulance. I reached for my phone. Laura kept touching Chloe's shoulder, calling her name again and again. Chloe's eyes were half closed, her head tipping slightly. Victor muttered that this was exactly why they did not like Chloe coming here. He said I lived like an old man who did not understand basic safety. I heard every word and answered none of them. The call center operator spoke clearly and slowly. I gave my address, explained that a young woman was dizzy and struggling to stay awake, and followed the instructions. I felt cold but steady. I kept thinking of that small packet, of the powder falling into my bowl, and of the casual way Chloe had looked at Victor afterwards. When the paramedics arrived, the kitchen felt even smaller. They moved around the table with practiced speed, checking Chloe's pulse, asking about allergies, about what she had eaten. Victor pointed at the soup and said it had to be that. Laura repeated that her daughter never had problems before. I stood to the side and answered questions when they turned to me, listing the ingredients of the soup in simple words. They took Chloe to the ambulance on a stretcher. Laura climbed in with her. Victor followed. There was no space for me in the back, so I sat in the front seat next to the driver. The siren stayed off, but the sound of the engine was loud and rough. I looked straight ahead. The city lights passed by in long lines. At the hospital, everything moved fast and slow at the same time. They wheeled Chloe into a room. Doors opened and closed. Nurses spoke with clear, short phrases. A nurse told us to wait in a small family room with pale walls and a soft sofa. There was a low table with old magazines no one read. Laura sat with her hands together, knuckles white. Victor walked back and forth, looking at his phone and then at the door. He said that this whole thing felt like a nightmare and that someone would have to be held responsible. He did not say my name, but he looked at me when he said it. Laura agreed with him and added that she never trusted my food storage habits. I sat in a chair near the wall. My hands were together but relaxed. I thought of Chloe as a little girl in a hospital once when she had a fever and how I had slept in the chair the whole night. Now she was an adult, and the chair under me felt harder. After some time, a nurse came in and told us that Chloe was stable for the moment. She said the doctors were running tests. Laura let out a long breath. Victor asked what had caused this sudden reaction. The nurse said they were still checking and left before we could ask more. The silence after she left was heavy. Victor resumed his pacing. He spoke about lawyers and about food safety. He said that once they knew exactly what had happened, they would need to think about next steps. Laura nodded. She glanced at me like I was a stranger in the room. I did not defend myself. I did not remind them that I had cooked for Chloe all her life, that I knew exactly what was in that soup. I only watched the door and listened to the faint sounds of the hospital corridor. I could hear rolling wheels, soft voices, the distant beeping of machines. It all felt far away and close at the same time. Finally, the door opened again. A doctor in a white coat stepped inside. He was holding a thin file. His face looked serious, not tired, just focused. He closed the door behind him with a soft click and took a seat opposite me. He looked at each of us in turn, then said he needed to ask me some very serious questions about what had been in that soup. The doctor sat down across from me and opened the thin file in his hands. His voice was calm, but each word felt heavy. He said they had given Chloe something to steady her and that she was resting now. Then he said her test results showed signs of a strong substance, something not from normal food. He asked me step by step what I had cooked. I listed every ingredient: carrots, potatoes, celery, onions, herbs, vegetable stock, a little oil, salt and pepper. I told him where I bought them and when. He wrote it all down. Then he asked if I had any medicines on the counter or old bottles in the kitchen, or if I had used any kind of powder that could have mixed with the soup by accident. I told him no. I kept my voice as steady as I could. I said my kitchen was small and simple, and I knew exactly what was on every shelf. There were no special powders on that counter. He watched my face while I spoke, as if he was trying to see something behind my words. He explained that the substance in Chloe's system looked more like something meant to calm or weaken a person quickly. He said it was not a spice and not a normal medicine someone would add to soup. Then he asked if anyone else in the house could have placed something in the food. His eyes moved toward Laura and Victor, then back to me, waiting. I thought of that small packet in Chloe's hand and the tiny swirl of white in my bowl. For a second, I saw again the reflection in the glass cabinet, the fast tilt of her wrist. The memory was sharp and clear. I felt the words rise in my throat, ready to name the exact moment. But I did not speak it yet. Instead, I said that I had been busy with the bread when they sat at the table. I told him I could not say what anyone else might have done at that moment. It was the truth, even if it was not the full story. His face tightened just slightly. He told us they would run more detailed tests and that he might need to speak with all of us again later. When he left the room, Laura turned on me at once. She asked how I could serve something that led to this. Her voice shook. Victor stepped closer and said quiet homes like mine often had hidden problems with old cupboards or forgotten items. He said that even a small mistake could have serious results and that I should think carefully before I spoke to hospital staff again. I listened and did not answer. My mind was half in the present and half years in the past. Sitting there in that room with the pale walls, I remembered a different hospital. Chloe had been 8 years old then. She had gotten a high fever, and Laura had been away on a work trip. I had carried Chloe into the emergency room in my arms. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. She had clung to my neck and whispered that she was scared. That night, I did not sit in a chair in the family room. I stayed beside her bed, holding her hand, counting each breath. Every time the nurse came in, I asked questions about her temperature, her fluids, her medicine. When she finally relaxed, she whispered that she was glad I was there because I always made things better. Those words had stayed with me for years. Back then, I was still the main parent. After the divorce, Chloe had lived with me most weekdays. Laura visited on weekends and took her for special outings. I was the one who packed lunches, fixed homework, and made sure there were clean clothes for school. I worked late some nights at the accounting office, but I made it home for dinner whenever I could. Money was tight, so I gave up hobbies and small comforts without complaint. I kept telling myself it was worth it because Chloe would have a stable life. When she reached high school, things started to change. Laura's career took off, and she met Victor at some conference. He had a good job in construction management, nice suits, and a confident way of speaking that drew people in. Their house was larger than mine, with tall ceilings and plenty of light. Chloe liked the space, the pool, the guest room she could call her own. At first, it was small differences. Chloe would come back from weekends at Laura's with stories about the new restaurant they tried or the surprise gifts Victor bought. She talked about his car, his trips, the people he knew. I was glad she was having fun, but I could feel a gap starting to form. When I suggested simple activities, she would sometimes say they felt basic compared to what she had done at their place. By the time she entered university, she spent more time at Laura and Victor's house than at mine. They lived closer to campus, and Victor liked to talk about connections and networking. He took her to events where he knew people from different firms. She started using his phrases, repeating his ideas about success, image, and modern life. I kept paying bills quietly in the background. Savings for tuition had come from years of careful planning. I drove an old car and wore the same few work shirts, but the college account stayed full. I did not mind the sacrifice. I thought this was what a father was meant to do. Graduation day was when I first felt truly erased. It was held in a large hall near Laura and Victor's place. I arrived early, wearing my best suit. The seat next to me stayed empty while I waited. When Chloe finally appeared, she ran right past me to where Victor stood with a bouquet. She hugged him first, hard, while he lifted her slightly off the ground. Someone took a photo. Laura joined them, and the three of them stood together, smiling as if they were the only family in the room. I stood in the second row, holding the envelope with the last tuition payment receipt in my pocket. When Chloe finally saw me, she waved and said she was glad I had made it. She introduced me to her friends as my other parent, a phrase that sounded small and strange after everything we had shared. For the group pictures, I was placed on the edge, almost outside the frame. Later, at the backyard party at Laura and Victor's house, Chloe made a short speech about the people who had helped her. She thanked her mother and Victor for their support and guidance. She called him her rock during exams. She did not mention the years of dinners at my kitchen table with textbooks spread out between us. I clapped anyway. Those memories passed through my mind in pieces while I sat in the hospital family room. The present came back into focus when another nurse came in to say that Chloe was resting and that only one person could see her at that moment. Laura went right away, with Victor at her side. I was left alone in the small room, the door closing gently behind them. In the quiet, I stared at the blank wall and tried to understand how we had reached this point, how the girl who once held my hand in fear at 8 years old had grown into the woman who poured an unknown powder into my bowl without even hesitating. I wondered who had taught her that this was acceptable, or if she had decided it on her own. After a while, Victor came back. He said Chloe was upset and believed something in the soup had caused this. He said she felt betrayed and was speaking about not wanting to visit my house again. His tone suggested that he agreed it was for the best. He mentioned that if the tests confirmed a problem with the food, there might be official steps to follow, including legal action. I listened, then asked how she was feeling physically. He said she was tired, shaken, and angry. He added that people in this age group did not tolerate old-fashioned ways very well, and that I should accept that things were different now. The sentence stayed with me, each word pressing into my chest. Later, a nurse told me I could stand at the door of Chloe's room but not go in. Through the partly open door, I saw her lying on the bed, eyes closed, an IV line in her arm. Laura sat in a chair beside her, holding her hand. Victor was on the other side, speaking softly. Chloe opened her eyes for a moment. Our eyes met. Her expression was not grateful or relieved. It was cold and distant, like I was a stranger who had caused trouble. I stayed only a few seconds and then stepped back. There was nothing else for me to do there. I walked out of the hospital, down the long corridor, through the automatic doors, and into the cool night air. The parking lot lights cast long shadows on the ground. My car looked smaller than ever between the taller vehicles. The drive home was quiet. I did not turn on the radio. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. I replayed the evening over and over in my head, the packet, the reflection, the switch, the soup. I wondered how much of that I should share and with whom. At a red light, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw only my own face, lined and tired, but calm. When I reached my house, the smell of soup still hung faintly in the air. The bowls on the table had been cleared by the paramedics, but the pot on the stove remained, half full and now cool. I turned off the kitchen light and went to the living room, where my small desk and filing cabinet stood against the wall. I opened the top drawer. Inside, everything was arranged in neat folders, each with a label in my handwriting. Work documents, tax records, old school papers of Chloe's that I had kept. Near the back was a thick, cream-colored envelope with a printed label, Chloe Reed, Family Trust. I took it out and sat down. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope. I remembered the day I had signed the original papers with a younger bank officer years ago, determined to secure Chloe's future even if something happened to me. At the time, I had believed that caring for her meant giving without expecting anything in return, not even gratitude. I did not open the envelope yet. I simply turned it over in my hands and read the label again and again. Then I placed it gently on the desk, beside the lamp, where I could see it clearly. It was a reminder that I had not always been as powerless as people around me seemed to think. I was reaching to turn off the lamp when my phone buzzed on the table. The sound made me jump slightly in the quiet room. I picked it up and saw Chloe's name on the screen. Her message was short and sharp. She wrote that whatever I had done that night had almost ruined her life, that she was ashamed of me and that I should not try to contact her again. She ended the message with a line about Victor knowing how to protect her better than I ever had. I read the words twice, then a third time. The room felt even smaller. I set the phone down beside the unopened envelope and sat there in the dim light, my hands resting on my knees, feeling something inside me settle into a new kind of stillness. The next morning, I woke up with a dull headache and a heavy feeling in my chest. I had slept on the couch in the living room without meaning to. The lamp was still on. The phone with Chloe's last message lay face down on the coffee table. For a few seconds, I did not remember why I felt so tired. Then the memories from the night before came back one by one. The packet, the soup, the hospital, the questions, the message telling me not to contact her. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. The house was very quiet. The chairs around the table were still slightly out of place from when the paramedics had rushed in. The pot on the stove sat cold and half full. I poured it out into the sink and watched the soup run away in slow swirls. It felt like I was washing away one part of my life. After coffee, I did something I usually avoid in the morning. I opened a social media app on my phone. The first thing I saw was Chloe's face. She had posted a photo from the hospital, taken from the bed, with a hospital bracelet on her wrist. The caption said that she had ended up in the emergency room after a meal at her father's house and that some people never understood basic safety. She wrote that some older people did not listen and that she was tired of being put at risk. There were comments under the post from her friends. Some wrote that this sounded terrible and that she should stay away from that house. Others said that some parents did not know when to step aside. One person used the word careless. No one knew what had actually happened at the table. They only knew the story she had chosen to tell. In that story, I was the problem. I read the comments slowly. I did not reply. I knew that if I tried to explain in that space, I would be drowned in more guesses and opinions. I put the phone down and stared at the wall for a moment. Then I picked it up again and sent Chloe a short message. I asked how she was feeling and said I was glad she was safe. I also wrote that I wanted to talk in person when she was stronger. She answered a few hours later. Her reply was brief. She wrote that she was fine but angry and that if I wanted to speak, it would be at a cafe near her campus where she felt comfortable. The tone made it clear that this was not a warm invitation. It was a controlled situation. Still, I agreed. I thought maybe I could reach her if we sat at the same table, away from the hospital lights and Victor's sharp comments. The campus cafe was busy when I arrived. Music played softly from hidden speakers. Students sat at small tables with laptops and cups of coffee. The walls were covered with posters for events and clubs. I felt out of place in my work shirt and old jacket, but this was where she wanted to meet. Chloe was already there, sitting at a corner table with her phone in her hand. She did not stand up when I approached. She nodded and said we should sit, using a tone that sounded like a manager starting a meeting. She spoke quickly about her classes, her plans, her projects. All of it sounded polished, like a presentation. When I tried to ask again about how she felt after the hospital, she waved it away. She said the doctors had taken care of it and that she was resting. Then she moved to the real subject. She said that what happened proved her point that my house was not safe. She said I lived in the past, that my habits were out of date, and that she could not risk her health because I refused to change. I tried to tell her that I knew exactly what I had put in the soup and that nothing from my shelves could have caused that reaction. She cut me off. She said that I always refused to accept responsibility. She brought up old stories in a fast, sharp way, as if she had been collecting them, times when I was late, when I worried too much, when I held her back from events because I feared for her safety. Her voice grew louder. A few people at nearby tables turned their heads. She did not lower her volume. She said she felt that my time as a real parent was over, and that I should accept that Victor understood how to guide her in the modern world. She said people like him knew how to move forward, while people like me stayed stuck with old furniture, old cars, and old fears. I sat and listened. Every sentence felt like a small cut, but I could not show it. I tried once more to ask if she remembered everything that had happened at the table, if she was sure about what she was saying. She looked me in the eye and said that people would always believe her over me, because in her words, I had nothing but an old house and old stories. Then she stood up. She said she had another meeting and that we were done for now. She left without a hug. The chair stayed warm after she walked away. I sat there for a while, my hands around a cup of coffee that I did not remember ordering. When I finally stepped outside, the day felt brighter than it should. The traffic on the street was steady. Students moved past me in small groups, laughing and talking about projects. I walked slowly to my car, trying to keep my breathing even. I felt not angry, but very clear. Her words about my time being over echoed in my mind. They did not break me. They settled into a quiet place inside, a place where decisions are made. On the drive home, my phone rang through the car speakers. It was an unknown number from a nearby area. I answered. A calm voice introduced himself as an officer from the local police station. He said they had been informed about an incident at my house that led to a hospital visit and that the hospital had reported a possible harmful substance. He asked if I could come in for a short conversation to give my side. I said I would. I did not ask who had spoken to them first. It did not matter. The system had started to move, and I knew I needed to move with it. The police station was small. The front area had chairs along the wall and a counter with a glass window. After I signed in, an officer led me to a modest interview room. There was a table, 4 chairs, and a recorder that he placed in the center. He said they only wanted to understand what had happened and that this was routine. He asked for my full name, address, and occupation. I gave them. Then he asked me to describe the evening from the moment my guests arrived to the moment the ambulance left. I told the story step by step. I explained the cooking, the table, the talk about the car, the moment I went to get bread. When I reached the part where Chloe added the powder, I chose my words carefully. I said that while I stood by the counter, I saw in the reflection of the glass cabinet that my daughter leaned toward my bowl and emptied a small packet into it. I described how I returned, switched the bowls, and sat down again without asking any questions. The officer listened without interrupting. His pen moved slowly over the paper in front of him. He asked if I knew what was in the packet. I said I did not. He asked if I had the packet now. I said I had not seen it since she used it. He asked why I had not spoken up immediately at the table. I said that in that moment I felt something stronger than shock. I felt calm and needed to see what would happen if I did not react. He looked at me for a long second. Then he asked if there was any record of what happened in the kitchen. I told him I had installed a small camera on the top of a cabinet a few months earlier, after someone had tried to open my back door one night. The camera recorded a wide view of the kitchen and part of the dining area. I said it was not hidden, it was just small and easy to forget. The officer asked if I could check whether the camera had recorded the dinner, and if so, if I would be willing to share that recording with them. I said I would check as soon as I got home, and that I was willing to provide anything that could help clarify the situation. He thanked me and said this could be very important. When I walked out of the station, the sky was starting to change color. The day was moving toward evening. I drove home in a quiet, steady way, feeling that some invisible line had been crossed. It was no longer just a family misunderstanding. It was something that other people with uniforms and files, would now look at closely. At home, I went straight to my small desk. My hands moved with more purpose than emotion. I turned on the computer, opened the software for the camera, and searched for the date and time of the dinner. The list of recordings appeared in a neat column. I clicked on the one that matched the hours we had been at the table. The video opened with a clear image of my kitchen and dining area. I watched myself move around the stove, carry plates, and serve soup. The angle caught the glass cabinet and the reflection that had shown me the truth. Then I saw Chloe, in real time, lean forward, take out the small packet, and pour its contents into the bowl in front of my chair. I watched Victor glance down and then look away, his face carefully blank. I watched myself come back with the bread, switch the bowls, and sit down. I watched her eat. I watched the color slowly change in her face, just as it had in reality. The entire scene was there, without sound, but clear. No one could claim it was only my memory or imagination. My breathing stayed slow. I did not rewind. I did not fast forward. I let the video run until the paramedics arrived and took her to the hospital. When it finished, I saved a copy to a USB drive and another copy to a secure folder online. I named the file with the date and time, nothing more. Only then did I turn back to the cream-colored envelope on the desk. I opened it carefully and took out the trust papers inside. The pages were thick and full of text. I had not looked at them in years. My eyes moved down the lines until I reached a section that talked about behavior, respect, and serious harm toward the person who created the trust. The exact legal phrases were complex, but the meaning filtered through clearly. Years ago, when I set this up, the lawyer had advised me to include a clause that protected me if the beneficiary ever tried to cause grave harm or publicly rejected me in a clear way. At the time, I had felt uncomfortable, but he had said it was a standard feature in some family documents. I had signed, thinking it was something that would never matter. Now, it suddenly mattered. I did not mark the page or take notes. I only read it slowly and then put the papers back in the envelope. I understood enough. There were options I had never thought I would need. As I sat there, the phone on my desk lit up and started to vibrate. The name on the screen was one I had not seen in a while. Anita, my old neighbor and longtime friend who had become a lawyer. I answered. She said that she had heard a very concerning story from someone at the hospital and that we needed to meet in person as soon as possible. When Anita called, her voice was firm but not loud. She said she had heard something strange from someone at the hospital, someone who knew her through work, and that my name had come up. She did not explain more on the phone. She only said we should meet at the old restaurant near our old neighborhood the next day. I agreed at once. I had known Anita for more than 20 years. We used to live on the same street when Chloe was small. Our kids played together in front yards while we talked on the sidewalk. Back then, she worked for a small law office and handled simple cases. Over time, she became very good at what she did and moved to a larger firm. We had not seen each other often in recent years, but we never fully lost contact. Every holiday, she sent a short message. She never forgot. The restaurant she chose had not changed much. The booths were still covered in the same dark material. The lights were warm and a little dim. It smelled of coffee and the faint mix of many meals cooked over many years. I arrived early, took a seat in a corner booth, and wrapped my hands around a glass of water until she walked in. She spotted me right away and came over with a small, tired smile. She said it was good to see me, but her eyes studied my face like she was checking for cracks. She asked how I was, not in the usual way people do, but in a way that meant she really wanted to know the answer. I told her that I was tired and that things were complicated. We ordered simple food. When the waiter left, she folded her hands on the table and told me what she had heard. Someone at the hospital had mentioned a case where a young woman had arrived after a strange reaction at a family dinner. My name had come up as the person who cooked the meal. She said that whenever something like this involved a family and a possible harmful substance, there was often more to the story than the first version. I took a breath and told her everything from the beginning. I described the text message inviting them to dinner, the soup, the talk about the car, the moment with the bread, the reflection in the glass cabinet, the packet, the switch, the hospital, and the posts on social media. I told her about the police call and the camera footage. I kept my voice level and my sentences clear. I did not try to paint myself as a hero, I just told the sequence of events. She listened without interrupting, just taking notes on a small pad. When I mentioned the camera recording, she looked up quickly. She asked if the video clearly showed Chloe using the packet and me switching the bowls, and I said yes. She asked if I had saved it in more than one place. I said I had a copy on a drive and another in a secure folder online. Then she asked a question that surprised me. She asked if there were any important financial documents tied to Chloe, anything like a trust or a will. I told her about the envelope on my desk, the one I had opened the previous day for the first time in a long while. I explained that the lawyer who created it had included a clause about serious harm and public rejection. I said I had not believed that part would ever matter. Anita nodded slowly. She said that, from what I described, things now were very different from what I had imagined when I set up that trust. She said that Chloe's actions at the table and her posts afterward were not small mistakes. They could be seen, in the language of her work, as something far more serious. She also said that if Victor and Laura began formal steps to blame me, all of these facts would be important. She told me I had to think very carefully now, not only as a father, but as a person who had rights and safety to consider. She said that I needed to keep every form of proof, the video, the hospital notes, the ambulance details, the social posts, the messages, and even the way they spoke to me at the hospital. She said that I should not answer any more questions from their side without her help. I asked if I should tell Chloe that I had the video. Anita shook her head. She said that sometimes when people think they have full control of the story, they become more open and careless. She said that my calm was a kind of shield. If I remained quiet and organized, and if they continued to press their version, the contrast would help later. Before we left, she told me she would send me a packet that evening with some options. She said these would include how to respond to any claims, how to protect myself, and what I could legally do with the trust if I decided that the line had been crossed. She did not go into details. She said it was better if I read it at home, at my desk, where I could take my time. When I got back to my house, I followed her advice at once. I turned my small living room into a simple command center. I cleared the desk, set the lamp on, and placed a blank pad of paper beside the keyboard. Then I opened the folder where I'd stored the camera stills and the screenshots. I printed a copy of the hospital bracelet photo and caption from Chloe's social page. I printed the comments where people repeated her story and called me careless. I printed our text messages, including the one that told me not to contact her and the one where she demanded we meet at the cafe. I captured the posts before anyone could change them or delete them. From the ambulance service website, I requested the basic visit record, which later came as a file by email. I printed that too. For the video, I took a few clear still images. Chloe leaning toward the bowl, the packet in her hand, the powder falling, the switch, the first spoonful. I did not enjoy looking at them, but I knew they would matter. Those images went onto paper and into a folder marked Video. By the time I was done printing, the desk was covered with sheets. I sorted them into piles. One for medical events, one for online posts, one for messages, one for legal threats. For that last one, I had only my memory of Victor's words so far, but I knew more would come. I labeled folders with simple titles in my careful handwriting and slid the pages inside. Late in the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a courier stood there holding a thick envelope. He asked for my name, checked it off on a sheet, and left as soon as I signed. The return address was from a law office connected to Victor's business. I already knew what kind of tone would be inside. At the desk, I opened the envelope and read the letter slowly. It said that they were aware of an incident at my home that had led to Chloe's medical emergency. It described my meal as unsafe and my actions as seriously careless. It suggested that I should accept responsibility and hinted that, if I did not, they would consider formal steps to seek damages. The language was smooth and precise, but the message was clear. They thought they could push me into fear and silence. I read the letter twice, then placed it into a new folder labeled Their Claims. I did not argue with the paper. I did not throw it away. I gave it a place just like every other piece of proof. I understood then that they really believed I would fold as soon as someone wrote on expensive letterhead. In the early evening, I went to the bank to see Evan, the young trust officer. He had worked with me years before when I first set up Chloe's trust. Back then, he had been new, and I had been one of his first clients who wanted something long-term and careful. He remembered me as soon as I stepped into his office. He asked how I was and what brought me in. I told him, in simple terms, that the relationship with my daughter had changed in a severe way and that I needed to understand what power the trust gave me now. I did not share every detail of the dinner, but I told him enough for him to understand that there had been an attempt to harm me and a public attempt to blame me afterward. Evan pulled up the old documents on his screen and showed me the structure of the trust. He reminded me that I was still the person in control while I was alive and mentally capable. He explained in soft but clear language that the clause about serious harm and public rejection gave me the right to change the beneficiary if certain conditions were met. He said that it did not happen often, but it was there for situations where the original purpose of the trust no longer matched reality. I asked if it was even possible to move the assets to another form or to direct them somewhere else, like a fund for someone who still treated me with basic care, or even for education for other young people. He said it was possible, with new papers and proper steps, as long as everything followed the terms of the original document and the law. He said that if a lawyer like Anita worked with the bank, they could guide me through every stage. He did not tell me what to do. He only reminded me that this was my decision and my right. He also said something that stayed with me. He said that people often saw trusts as gifts that could never change, but in truth, they were living agreements built on a base of mutual respect. If that base was destroyed, the agreement could change too. When I stepped back out of the bank into the cool evening air, I felt a strange calm. For years, I had thought of myself as the quiet, harmless person on the edge of other people's stories. Now I saw that I had been holding the frame of the story all along. I had simply chosen not to use it. That night back at home, I turned on my computer again. There was an email from Anita waiting in my inbox. The subject line was one word: options. There was a document attached. I downloaded it and sent it to the printer. As the pages began to feed through, the printer filled the room with its steady, low sound. One page after another slid out and stacked on the tray. I did not read them right away. I just stood there in the soft light of the lamp, listening to that sound and watching the pages pile up, knowing that each sheet carried a possible path forward. The stack of pages from Anita sat on my desk like a small white wall. I let the printer finish its work before I touched them. When the room fell quiet again, I sat down and began to read. The document was written in clear, simple language, even though it described complex things. The first part explained my situation as she saw it. A family incident, an attempted harmful act, a false public story, and a legal threat against me. She wrote that this was not just an emotional conflict, it was also a matter of safety and reputation. Then she listed paths I could take. One section described how to respond if Victor's lawyers pressed forward with their claim about unsafe food. Another section described how to protect myself if the police decided to move past questions into something more serious. A third section, longer than the others, covered the trust and what could be done with it. She wrote that I did not have to decide anything that night. She advised me to read, to sleep on it, and then to make choices with a clear head. Still, one sentence near the end stood out in a strong way. She wrote that my calm nature was an asset, but the calm did not mean I had to accept false blame or stay bound to a one-sided agreement made in a different time. I put the packet down and leaned back in my chair. On one side of the desk sat the cream envelope with Chloe's name on it. On the other side lay the new pages from Anita. Between them were the folders marked Video, Messages, Hospital, and Their Claims. In the space between all the paper sat my life as a father, sliced into parts. I slept better that night than I expected. It was not deep rest, but it was enough to steady me. In the morning, I made coffee and sat at the desk again. The light from the window fell over the documents. I read the packet a second time, slower. At the end, I took a pen and signed the authorization form that allowed Anita to speak and act on my behalf in this matter. My hand did not shake. When she called later, she already had the notification on her end. She said we would move forward on two paths at the same time. First, we would prepare a formal answer to Victor's letter, pointing out that any claim about careless cooking ignored the clear evidence from my camera and the nature of the substance found in Chloe's tests. Second, we would begin the process of changing the trust. I told her that changing the trust felt like giving up on Chloe completely. Anita said she understood that feeling. She also said that sometimes protecting yourself and honoring your own effort meant accepting that someone had stepped so far away from you that old plans no longer fit. She reminded me that even if I cared about Chloe, I did not have to keep rewarding actions that put me in harm's way. She suggested that we reshape the trust to benefit people who showed consistent respect and care, whether they were family by blood or by choice. She mentioned that we could also direct part of it towards something that matched my values, like education. She did not push, she only laid out possibilities. We agreed that she would prepare the new papers and that I would sign them in front of a notary later in the week. In the meantime, she asked me to send her copies of every document I had. I scanned the pages from each folder and uploaded them to a secure link she provided. The video file took longer, but it eventually joined the rest. Days passed in a quiet pattern of work and preparation. I went to my job at the accounting office and finished the tasks on my list. My coworkers did not know anything about what was happening. I kept my voice steady and my schedule normal. In the evenings, I returned to my small house, the same house Chloe had grown up in, and sat at the desk, reviewing what Anita sent me. One evening, she called to tell me that Victor's lawyers had received her first response. They had replied with a shorter letter, still confident, but now less sharp. They asked to clarify certain details and suggested that all parties meet in a formal setting to avoid misunderstandings. Anita said this reaction was expected. She explained that in situations like this, the court often scheduled a mediation before any formal case went forward. A neutral person would be present, everyone would sit at the same table, each side would present its version, and there would be space to find a resolution. She said that such a session had now been arranged at the courthouse on a specific date and time. She would be there with me. When I hung up, I looked around my living room. The couch, the lamp, the small rug, the framed photo of Chloe at age 6 with missing front teeth, all were still in their places. There was a strange feeling in knowing that soon we would face each other not at my kitchen table, but at a table in a courthouse room. A few days before that mediation date, I went to the notary office to sign the new trust papers. The building was modest, with a small waiting area and a simple desk. The notary was a quiet man with glasses who checked my identification and read a prepared statement about the documents. 2 witnesses, employees from the office, sat nearby. I read the summary Anita had prepared at the top of the stack. It stated plainly that I was changing the main beneficiary of the trust due to serious harmful acts and clear, ongoing rejection by the original beneficiary. It also described where the assets would go now, a combination of a scholarship fund and another person who had shown steady support. The names and numbers were there on the page, but I did not linger on them in that moment. I focused instead on the simple fact that I had the right to decide. The notary pointed to the spaces where I needed to sign. I took the pen and wrote my name in each place. Between signatures, there was small talk about the weather and the city traffic. The witnesses added their names. The notary stamped the documents with a slow, careful motion. Each stamp sounded like a small, final mark on an old story. When it was done, I stepped outside with a copy in a plain folder. The sky was bright, and people on the street moved with their own worries and plans. No one knew that I had just changed the shape of my future and Chloe's. That was something quiet and invisible, carried in a simple manila folder under my arm. That evening, Anita called again. She said that all the documents were now in order: the trust, the response to Victor, the summary of the video, and the medical notes. She had arranged them in a way that told the truth clearly, step by step. She also told me that the police had reviewed the camera footage and the tests, and that their view of the situation had shifted. They were no longer looking at me as the person who caused harm. They were now looking at me as someone who might have been the intended target. She said that a police investigator would be near the mediation room on the day of the session, ready to continue with formal questions if needed. She told me not to be alarmed by that. She said it was actually a form of protection. Everyone at the table would know that the truth was now bigger than family opinion. The night before the mediation, I laid everything out on my desk. I opened each folder and checked that the key items were inside: a printed image from the video, the social posts, the text messages, the hospital summary, the letter from Victor's lawyers, the trust summary, and Anita's clear, calm explanations. I placed them back in order and put them into a single, slightly worn briefcase I had once used for job interviews. I slept lightly. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. I shaved, put on my best suit, and tied the same tie I had worn to Chloe's graduation. I looked at myself in the mirror. The lines around my eyes were deeper now, my hair was thinner, but my gaze was steady. I did not see a weak, replaceable man. I saw someone who had done his duty for many years and was finally ready to defend it. On my way out, I paused in front of the old photo of Chloe as a child. In that picture, she was laughing, her face open and bright. For a moment, I remembered how she used to jump into my arms when I came home from work, how she once said I always made her feel safe. I let that memory sit with me for a few breaths. Then I picked up the briefcase and left the house. The courthouse was a solid building of stone and glass. Inside, the air felt cooler, the sounds a little echoing. I met Anita near a row of chairs in the corridor. She wore a dark suit and held a slim folder. She greeted me with a small nod and asked how I was feeling. I told her I was calm. It was the truth. She reminded me that I did not have to raise my voice or argue. She said that the documents and the video would speak for us. She repeated that the goal was not revenge, but clarity, safety, and fairness. I already knew that, but hearing it again helped. A few minutes later, I saw Laura and Victor appear at the end of the corridor with a lawyer I recognized from the letter. Chloe walked slightly behind them, dressed neatly, her expression controlled. She did not look at me at first. When she finally glanced in my direction, her face showed more discomfort than anger. I wondered if she knew that things were no longer as simple as a story on her social page. We all waited near the same door. The wooden plaque beside it had the word mediation on it. From inside, I could hear faint voices and the shuffling of chairs from an earlier session. My briefcase felt heavier in my hand, not from the weight of the paper, but from what those pages held. Time stretched in that hallway. No one spoke to me directly. Victor whispered to his lawyer. Laura fixed a loose strand of hair. Chloe stared at the floor, tapping her phone screen without really looking at it. Anita stood beside me, steady, her eyes on the door. Finally, the door opened. A clerk stepped out with a clipboard and called our names one by one. He asked us to enter. I took a breath, shifted the briefcase in my hand, and walked forward with Anita at my side. As I crossed the threshold, I heard the door begin to swing closed behind us. The soft, final click as it shut sent a clear signal in my mind. Whatever image they had built of me outside this room was about to meet the shape of the truth laid out on the table inside. The mediation room was plain and bright, with a long table in the center and chairs around it. A screen stood on a cart near one wall, and there was a small box of cables beside it. The mediator, a middle-aged man in a simple suit, sat at the head of the table with a notepad. He asked everyone to sit down and wrote our names at the top of his page. Anita and I sat on one side. Across from us were Laura and Victor, with their lawyer between them. Chloe sat a little to the side, close to Victor, her hands folded in front of her. No one met my eyes. The mediator explained how things would go. He said this was not a trial, but a place to find clarity and, if possible, agreement. He said each side would speak without interruption, then he would ask questions. His voice was even and polite. When he finished, he invited Victor's lawyer to begin. Victor's lawyer spoke with practiced ease. He described me as an older parent who had not kept up with basic safety. He said that a meal at my house had led to Chloe's medical emergency, and that this showed a serious failure of care. He repeated phrases from the letter about unsafe food and poor judgment. He said Chloe felt shaken and that her trust in me as a parent had been damaged. He hinted that they could ask for financial compensation, but were here first to resolve things peacefully. During all of this, Victor sat still, his hands flat on the table, his expression controlled. Laura kept her eyes on the lawyer, nodding at certain points. Chloe stared at a spot on the table, her face tense. When the lawyer finished, the mediator turned to Anita and me. He asked if we had a different view of the events. Anita said we did. She kept her voice calm. She said we respected the process and were ready to show a few simple facts. She asked if she could use the screen in the room. The mediator agreed. Anita stood, connected a small USB drive to the box of cables, and waited while the screen lit up. On it appeared a still frame from my kitchen camera. My table, my stove, my chairs. The date and timestamp sat in the corner. Anita explained that this was a recording from a security camera I had installed months earlier. She said it showed the dinner in question from start to finish. She asked everyone to watch closely and then pressed play. The room grew very quiet. On the screen, we saw the scene unfold, me moving around the stove, placing bowls on the table, serving soup. Then, in clear detail, we saw Chloe lean forward while my back was turned. We saw the small packet in her hand, the fine powder falling into the bowl in front of my chair. We saw her glance briefly at Victor, and we saw his eyes follow the motion and then slide away. Next, we watched myself return with the bread, lift my bowl, and switch it with hers in one smooth motion. We saw her eat. We saw the slow change in her posture, then the arrival of the paramedics. The video had no sound, but it did not need any. No one spoke while it played. When it ended, Anita paused the last frame. Chloe's hand was frozen over the bowl, the packet still visible between her fingers. The mediator took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, then put them back on. He asked Victor's lawyer if they had been aware of this recording. The lawyer hesitated, said they had not seen it. Victor kept his eyes down. Chloe's face had gone pale, and she was staring at the screen as if she could will the image away. Laura looked from the screen to her daughter and then to me, as if seeing the room for the first time. Anita did not raise her voice or change her tone. She walked around the table and handed the mediator a neat stack of papers. She said the first pages were the hospital reports that showed a strong sedative in Chloe's system at a level that would have been especially serious for someone my age. She said the next pages were printouts of Chloe's social posts blaming my soup, with dates and times that matched the video. She pointed out the letter from Victor's lawyer accusing me of unsafe cooking. The mediator flipped through the pages, his expression growing more serious with each one. He asked Chloe softly if she wished to say anything about what they had just seen. Chloe whispered that she had made a mistake, that she had only meant to calm things down, but the words sounded thin and uncertain. Victor shifted in his chair but said nothing. Anita then placed another document in front of the mediator. This one was thicker and had my name on the first page as the creator of a family trust. She explained that years ago I had built a trust for my daughter, with a clause that protected me if the beneficiary ever tried to cause serious harm or publicly rejected me in a clear way. She showed him the page with that clause and then the signed, notarized amendment I had executed a few days earlier. She stated, plainly, that in light of Chloe's actions, her attempt to tamper with my food, her public claims against me, and the legal pressure now directed at me, I had used my right to remove her as the main beneficiary. The assets were already redirected, she said, in full compliance with the terms and the law. She did not sound angry when she said it. She sounded like someone reading a weather report. Laura reached out for the document with a shaking hand. She scanned the lines, then looked up at me, her eyes wide. Victor asked if this could be changed back. Anita said that, legally, the decision was complete and that any further changes would again rest with me alone. The mediator leaned back in his chair. He said that, based on the video, the medical report, and the trust documents, the picture was very different from the one first presented. He noted that any claim about unsafe food now seemed misplaced. He also mentioned that a police investigator was waiting nearby and that, after this session, there might be follow-up steps that did not concern mediation at all. He turned to me and asked if there was anything I wanted from this process. I said I wanted the false claims withdrawn, in writing, and I wanted no further contact from Victor's lawyers. I said that with the trust already changed and the truth recorded, I did not need anything else from them. After a long silence, Victor's lawyer said they would withdraw their letter and any suggestion that I was at fault. He said they would put that in writing and send it through Anita. He did not apologize directly, but his voice had lost its earlier smooth confidence. Laura said nothing. Chloe kept her eyes fixed on the table. The mediator wrote a brief summary and read it aloud. Their claim withdrawn, no payment from me, no further contact through their legal side, acknowledgement that the video and documents existed and might be used by authorities as needed. He asked everyone to confirm. Anita nodded. The other lawyer did too, slowly. The session ended. Chairs scraped against the floor as people began to stand. Anita gathered our papers and slipped the USB drive back into her folder. The mediator thanked us and said he would file the record. I picked up my briefcase. As I walked toward the door, I heard Chloe's voice behind me. It was small and unsteady. She said my name softly, then added the word she had once used with warmth, asking me to wait. For a moment, I paused. My hand rested on the door handle. I thought of the packet in her hand, the posts, the letter, the years of quiet work. I also thought of the trust papers now signed and sealed, and the path I had chosen. I opened the door without turning around. The sound of it closing behind me was gentle but final, a simple click that marked the end of the story they had written for me and the start of one I had written myself.